So I'm really delighted to introduce our very illustrious panel today. We have Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, Member of Parliament for India, Ms. Laura Lane, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs and Sustainability Officer for UPS from the USA, Ms. Sandhya Devanathan, Vice President for Meta in India, Rebecca Razavi, who's Head of Policy and Economic Graph at Asia Pacific LinkedIn, Australia, and Ms. Neera Dali Chayuch, President Secretary General of the Algerian Tech Women and Women in AI in France. Great. So very warm welcome to all of our panelists, and I think we're really looking forward to having a very engaging discussion over the next 45 minutes. Just in terms of the structure of the session, I think we've got about 30 minutes where I'll be asking the panelists a few questions, and then we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So in the panel today, I think as Mr. Kumar was outlining, I mean, I think the benefits of having more women leaders, more women founders of businesses is evidently clear. But what more can we do to help ensure that the startup community is more diverse and inclusive? What can governments and private sector organizations and civil society organizations do to help support and incubate women-led founders in starting and scaling their ventures? And globally, given that we have such different great geographical perspectives on this panel, we'll be looking at what are some of the best practice examples that exist of supportive infrastructure and policies that can help create a more gender-friendly startup ecosystem. So I think to start, I'd like to ask Ms. Priyanka Chaturvedi, tell us a little bit more about the Indian startup ecosystem. So, we know that India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. And I think one of the things that is, really exciting to see is that this boom in startups in India is not just coming from the metros now. 50% are coming from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So we're seeing tremendous potential being unlocked. From India's experience, what do you think that governments, corporations, and civil society organizations can do to help build a strong support system, especially for women entrepreneurs, to build and scale their ventures?
So thank you so much for that question. And considering I'm opening this discussion, a very good afternoon to all those who are participating in this, I think, very important discussion, considering we are not just talking about reclaiming, we first need to claim. That's the starting point. And about how government can effectively intervene, we are seeing, like you said, India is ranked third in terms of startups. And it's a very vibrant space, a space where, it's much talked about. But if you look at women's participation in this, you'd find the disparity. You'd find the disparity because there are few existential challenges for women in these spaces. Some are conscious barriers, some are unconscious barriers. The conscious barriers are something that we keep talking about: financial support, venture capitalists funding them, angel investors funding them. But how many angel investors are led by women? That is starting point one. The second point is how many of the women are in the decision-making spaces. Even in a country like US, which is in a recent survey, said that it is one of the best countries, best suited countries for women to start their organizations, their startups, followed by Canada, Australia, Sweden. India happens to be amongst the least, at the bottom three. So that is something that India would have to work upon, very consciously allocating funds for women coming from government, as well as through spaces which I think Mr. Kumar was speaking about, how your corporate foundations are also working towards that. Second, creating ecosystems for women. So when you're talking about tier 2 and tier 3 cities, they have a lot of support coming to start their micro businesses. How do you scale it up in urban areas? How do you ensure that they are continuously invested upon? I had a very interesting fact that came across my notice was when we look at banking sector, especially the small banks where women go for seeking loans and financial support, usually are cooperatives. There are very little women entrepreneurs who have not paid back on the loans that they have taken. So women are someone you need to invest in. So that's a very conscious effort that would go into government as well as into private spaces. So this is where I feel government should be coming in, that conscious belief that before we talk about reclaiming, women need to start claiming. How do they claim? That you claim it by doing away with the conscious barriers which I spoke about. The unconscious barriers. The unconscious barriers come from women themselves at times, where they feel the inability to be able to dream, scaling up, inability to, live up to the competition, etc. The social conditioning, the environment that you're performing in, those are the unconscious barriers that exist ever since, a woman starts taking first steps towards self-financing or self-made businesses. So those are the unconscious biases that exist, and the conscious barriers we've already spoken about. And conscious barriers is, of course, where governments and private companies, etc., foundations can participate in. In unconscious barriers, definitely the government needs to intervene. That is where the government intervention is needed, where when we talk about the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign that has been pretty successful, then you also have to add one more aspect to it, which is the Beti Kamao, where you make women financially empowered and you tell them that this is part of who you are and this is how we see our daughters. Not just, fitting into some role, but fitting into business roles, into roles where they are financially empowered. So I think that aspect needs to be built in as far as India is concerned.
And I think picking up on that a little bit, I mean, raising capital is a key challenge for all founders, especially in those early stages. What more do you think we can do to help, particularly support women to have the confidence, the knowledge, the ability to be able to know how to navigate those potential sources of, financing, especially I think now from tier 2, tier 3 cities and below?
So absolutely, you need to have a dedicated fund coming from the government, a dedicated policy which not just nurtures women entrepreneurs, but also talks about even if they need to be reskilled, repurposed. When he spoke about, going on digital platforms and being able to sell your goods, sell your services, or whatever you're providing, what your idea is another aspect that can be looked into. So it has to be a whole ecosystem where you have a mentorship program, where you have networking opportunities, where you have the ability to be able to fund these startups and fund these women-led businesses. We are seeing really successful stories, whether we look at Nykaa, Zivame, etc., as far as women-led businesses are concerned. But how do we take it to the grassroots level and right to the bottom? And the World Economic Forum report says that if India pushes women entrepreneurship, you could add $7 trillion to our economy. So it's not just makes sense in terms of gender justice, it makes sense towards economic empowerment for a nation too. So those are things where I feel if you create a system, and then civil society, you partnering with civil society, you partnering with private businesses, you partnering with various other sectors to be able to create an environment where women entrepreneurship is promoted, is not looked at from a gender lens, eventually, but initially it needs that gender lens for gender justice and bringing in that equality.
But it has to be holistic, as you're saying, looking at all of those
yes.
different aspects. So I think picking up on that, I think now my next question is for Laura. So as companies accelerate their efforts to diversify and build, resilient supply chains, which I think, in the last few years we've seen how important that is, how can we ensure that there's sufficient thinking about and prioritization of women's empowerment?
So here's the bottom line. If women are going to be able to engage in the global economy in any kind of meaningful way, you need to have capacity building, you need to have market access, and you need to eliminate some of the discriminatory policies that frankly exist in every government around the world. And in order to have resilient supply chains, you need to have that diversity in those supply chains. And that means engaging every small and medium-sized business in being involved in facilitating trade. From a UPS perspective, we recognize that if we want to grow resilient supply chains, we need to be helping lift up all SMBs to be engaging in global trade. But we thought in particular, if we focused on women, we focused on the most discriminated against, we'd lift all other boats with it. And so from that perspective, our company's focus has been on addressing the biggest challenges that women entrepreneurs face in terms of being a part of global supply chains. First, we have decided that it's important to raise the capacity, the skills that they have. That's why here in India, in fact, on Tuesday, I'm like losing track of which day it is, we launched our Women's Exporter Initiative with the government ministry that focuses on MSMEs, because we recognize that if we give these women the capacity and the training that they need to not only take their businesses to bigger locales, but to be part of global supply chains, we can be providing the resiliency that we need in global supply chains as well. So what are we doing? We're giving them training on what it takes to take your business and be able to export. As a company, UPS operates in 220 countries and territories. We have a little background about what it takes to cross borders in countries big and small, and we're trying to give these women, through this training program, the ability to understand what it takes to facilitate trade, what the customs and brokerage requirements are, and how to take the logistics capabilities that companies like UPS has and bring them to more markets, taking their products and bringing them to more markets. Second area, though, is that all essential market access. A lot of women are disadvantaged when it comes to entering certain markets. The fact of the matter is, tariff policies are written in such a way that some of the markets or some of the goods and products that women sell actually face higher tariffs because trade rules have been written by men focused on products that facilitate the growth of their businesses. So we're really ensuring that from a market access side, that the discriminatory trade policies that have been put in place are eliminated, and that it becomes a level playing field for those areas where women are engaging in trade. And last but not least, eliminating the fundamental discrimination that exists in domestic regulation. And here we've been real champions in the World Trade Organization and working with other governmental entities to fundamentally eliminate some of the discrimination that exists in the regulatory policies that prevent women startups from being able to even engage in fundamental aspects of their business. The fact of the matter is, women around the world sometimes can't even open their own bank accounts without a male co-signator. They can't even ask for a loan without a male signator. They sometimes can't even travel within countries without having male permission. At the end of the day, you want to have women startups being able to engage and be a part of more of the global economy. You have to eliminate those kind of restrictions and ensure that there's no bias written into the financial services aspects of how they are able to build a business and grow a business, but also be able to ensure that some of the initiatives like Digital India, that there is an opportunity for women to equally benefit from some of that programming. We're involved in every aspect of this because we recognize that helping a woman business grow is not just the right thing to do, it's great for business. And that's why this panel is so important, because we want to be delivering for the other half of the world and helping them truly engage in global commerce.
Thanks, Laura. And I think just pressing on that a little bit more, I mean, I think what's great is the global perspective that you can bring to this from the many countries that you're working in at the moment, but also you personally have worked in not only the US, but Asia and Africa. So what are some of the common challenges that you've seen for women founders across different countries, particularly at more of a grassroots level for sort of small and medium-sized women entrepreneurs? And perhaps if you could tell us a little bit about some of the innovative ways you've seen women be able to tackle some of these challenges.
They can't get access to the financing or the loans to be able to scale a business, much less take it global. They often are underserved in terms of being able to use digital technologies. They often don't have the access to the training and the skills, or often aren't encouraged to leverage those. And I think the pandemic was, in many ways, a horrible challenge for all of us to work through, but it did accelerate, a lot of government's efforts to create more interconnectedness that I think in many ways women seized on to be able to keep their, what businesses they had going, or to restart them in a post-pandemic setting. And so some of the local initiatives that I've seen really working are when there's a public-private partnership that really focuses on women's entrepreneurship and giving them the tools and the capacity training that they need so that they not only have the confidence to take their businesses farther, but also have the tools and the resources to be able to engage not just within their local environment, but to be able to take their businesses globally. And so I would fundamentally say some of the successes have come when there is a concerted effort between large businesses like ours that recognize the power of small and medium-sized businesses to be part of these global supply chains, working in concert with governments to be able to stimulate opportunities and drive the capacity building that allows these women-owned businesses to punch at a bigger weight than they traditionally would.
Yeah, definitely. And so some of the social media platforms, I think both as Priyanka and Laura have also alluded to, can have an important role in helping support women founders, especially at early stages. So being able to learn things around how they can market their goods, build a network, find mentors. What do you think tech companies can do more to sort of support the creation of inclusive platforms for women founders to grow and access resources, especially in those early stages?
We're all arriving at the same conclusions, right? But if you think about it, 50% of half of the sky is all of us, but participation in economies and entrepreneurship, all of that is woefully inadequate. I've just moved from Singapore, so delighted to be here. And one of the things that we saw in Southeast Asia as well, which is common here, is access to funding. So women-founded startups in Southeast Asia, only 2% of them got funded by VCs. And you talked about that as well, which is even the decision makers tend not to be women. So what's getting funded? Are there important areas getting left out? Those are issues to address. Also, what I do want to point out is we're in the stage of massive digital transformation that's happening in economy after economy, right? And startups power a lot of that. I see it every day. I've worked 7 years at Meta, and I've seen startups go from 0 to exponential growth rates in no time at all. And these will power a lot of the innovations of tomorrow and be big, meaningful parts of society. So it's imperative that we don't leave women behind when when we're shaping what the next iteration of the internet or the next iteration of economies look like. So for us at Meta, we're super passionate about this. I see LinkedIn's also here, so we'll hear more from you, Rebecca, as well. But I would say we think about it in 4 ways. So one, access to credit, right? The way we've done this in India specifically, and this is in India first, and we hope at some point it'll go global, is we've actually partnered with other partners, which I can talk about in a bit, around giving access to small businesses that are starting up and giving them access to funding. So we do small business loans with INDIFI and Flexi loans. And what we've done there is what we've realized is lots of small businesses on our platform, and we're lucky enough to have many of them starting on our platform, don't have access to credit, and it's a double whammy if you're a woman. So we give a small interest rate break if you're a women-owned startup, because we want to give that benefit to women. We also have done buy now, pay later, which means if you buy ads on our platform, you can take 3 months to pay it off. So all of this is our way of saying, okay, we want you to participate. Equally, along with access to credit, I think mentorship is another area that we focused on. And there in India, for the past 4 years, we've partnered with the Nudge Foundation and Pragati. Just in 2022, we mentored 8 nonprofits. I think we supported 8 nonprofits, which then had this ripple effect of impacting 5 lakh, women entrepreneurs. So that's another way to think about it. So I talked about the first one, which was access to credit and mentorship. The second thing we think about deeply is upskilling and training. We connect hundreds of millions of users in this country. Many of them, like I said, start their businesses on our platform. There's a lot of digital transformation happening, not just here, but globally. So the things that, one that I'm really proud of is what started actually in Singapore, is massive in India, and has gone global to 38 countries. We started a program called She Means Business, which has so far impacted 1 million women and has launched in 38 countries. So it's really around giving digital tools, skilling. It's hard to just set up a shop, open it. Like, it's easy, but it's also hard. You need the training, you need the right resources. So that's one area we're focused on. And during the pandemic, like you pointed out, it was especially hard. So we launched a $100 million fund to support women-owned startups across the globe. So that's on the upskilling side. We've done plenty in India as well around upskilling and training, women. The second thing, one of the ones that I do want to call out is GOAL, which is what we've done with the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, which is again around 10 lakh women and youth in the tribal communities, getting digital empowerment tools and getting educated on them. The third bit that I would talk about is just investments. And companies like ours should be making those kinds of bets. And when we think about the metaverse and where the next iteration of the internet is going, we've started in partnership with METI and XR Startup Fund, where we mentoring 40 startups. But what's great is what you pointed out, which is a lot of it is coming from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And we've sort of taken also a conscious lens on how many women-owned startups are there in the XR fund, and that's around 20%. It's a small number, but that's something that we're focused on. The last bit I'd say, and I apologize for a longer answer, is around how we think about tools. When we surveyed women-owned SMBs, almost 100% of them use a digital platform of some sort to grow their business. 92% of them use our digital platforms. So really the responsibility for us to think about is how do we make it safer, easier, for women to onboard on our platforms, and that's something we think about. All of this has led to some outcomes which we're proud of, which is just that on Instagram, 2/3 of women of businesses have self-identified in India as being women-owned, almost 2/3, 60%. And since the pandemic, we've seen a doubling of 50% of all the businesses that have opened up, women-owned businesses that have opened up have come since the pandemic. So the rate of acceleration of startups and women-owned businesses, coming to fore is increasing on our platforms.
Great. And Sandhya, I think picking up on that point, and which I think Laura was also talking about, during the pandemic, I think we saw a tremendous increase in terms of digital adoption, and platforms, and particularly social media platforms, had a key role in sort of helping entrepreneurs keep their businesses going. And I think one of the things that we were quite excited to see is that, during what was a very difficult time, you did also see quite a lot of women at a grassroots level starting to, build up their skills to be able to use, different platforms to be able to keep their businesses going. And what we saw in, I think one of the publications that Mr. Kumar alluded to that we published last year, we saw a lot of women who had never used platforms before being able to learn how to use them, market their goods. So they were not only able to keep their businesses going, but they went from being, just getting customers in their village to getting customers in their surrounding village or within their state, or even sometimes outside of their state as well. So the potential was quite significant for them. But still, nevertheless, there are many, many women who don't have those digital skills and don't have that ability to be able to make the best out of new platforms. So what more do you think we can do to help support that and unlock that potential for women?
Yeah, and that's also a great question. I'd sort of go back to what I talked about, which is I think it's really important to think about financial. I was a banker for a long time before this, so I'm quite passionate about financial inclusion and financial literacy. I do think having access to credit, especially if you're an MSME, becomes really important. And I was reading this IFC report that talked about how few women actually, one, they pay higher borrowing rates. Two, they have less access. They have to give more collateral than their male counterparts when they stand.
Even though they pay it back 98%.
Yes, and better outcomes. Yeah, and much better outcomes, right? In terms of just more successes in the businesses that they do start up. So, which is why, and we know we can't do this alone. We're not, that's why our partnership around enabling that credit access, I think, is something that more corporations need to do, and you don't have to do it alone. How do you tap on the ecosystem? How do you think about partnering with the government to enable that to happen is something that I think would be crucial. The second thing that I would say is around financial literacy. Again, WhatsApp, connecting hundreds of millions of users across this country. One of the things that we did with Mandesi Bank was just create this chatbot that then helped them. They did that also with the government entity that then helped them actually reach out to lots of women across India. And what they focused on is you can get a Mandesi MBA degree on like how do you start a business, how do you think about being literate financially, how do you think about running, what are your running costs like. So all of that, but all using technology tools. So as a platform, we think about the access we're providing and how can we partner to enable that access actually is powerful, helps in inclusion, and Mandesi is just one of those examples. Similarly, for She Means Business, we partnered with FICCI, and in 2022, we impacted 5 lakh women. Because again, I think the question to ask is, how do you sort of take what you can do alone? We can probably reach 10,000, 100,000, but for a country the size of India, how do we effectively think about public-private partnerships or, even partnerships with other private organizations to sort of to exponentially increase the impact we have? So that's what we think about.
Great, thanks, Sandhya. And now, Rebecca, LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network, and you recently announced that you now have more than 100 million members in India. What are some of the trends that you're seeing around female founders, particularly in India through your platform?
Well, thanks, Vanita. Well, as you said, LinkedIn's got now 100 million members plus in India, and globally we've got over 900 million, which gives us something of unique insight into what's happening in terms of the wider economy, what's happening with skills, the future of work, lots of different metrics that we look at. And really important to us is creating an equitable world of work. And of course, the gender gap issue across so many aspects of the way we work, what we do, what happens to women, and particularly in terms of women founders. We did have a look last year with the WEF on the Global Gender Gap Report, which you mentioned, Priyanka, looking at what is the situation with women founders. Now, there's a little bit of a glimpse of positive light. So what we saw was that the rate of growth of women founders is faster than men. And that's a global phenomenon, and it's been happening for a little while. It spiked during the pandemic. Just to give you an example, we saw between 2020 and 2019, the share of women founders grew by 45%. For men, it was 32%. So a significant gap there. In India itself, we saw over the 5-year trend, 2016 to 21, we saw that the growth of the share of women founders was about 2.8 times, and for men, it was about 1.7. So quite a significant gap there. So it's telling us something interesting, and particularly that development, which has been sustained so far, that we saw during the pandemic. What is it that's driving more women? Now, of course, there are some potential maybe negative push factors. So we know that women were disproportionately affected by things like the lockdown, particularly the sectors that women tended to be dominating in, service sector, retail. They were all heavily affected. We also know from consumer surveys that we've been doing that women were particularly becoming more acutely aware that they wanted more flexibility about how and where they worked. And perhaps when you layer that, and we saw that 8 in 10 women wanted that. And in fact, we saw something like 70% of women in India were willing to not look at roles that did not have some flexibility, which is fascinating. But when you layer that together with what was happening in the wider enabling environment, and to touch on some points that you've all made, there are a number of things happening simultaneously across the economy. And India is just a wonderful example to explore and look at. Because when we look at what's happened with, say, 180 million women now coming into the banked sector and having access to digital financial services, that confluence of events is happening around the same time. And of course, we know that there was a precipitation of a massive shift across all industries in terms of what digitalization enabled in terms of innovation, but in terms of particularly women being able to choose more effectively how they wanted to set up their businesses. And we saw some reduction in some of those barriers to entry. That could be something like the cost of not needing to set up an office. So you're reducing some of those financial hurdles, which we know are significant for women founders. So there's a number of possible factors there happening at the same time. It's very hard to draw the actual linear line between, say, something like the big STEP program that the Indian government's been doing, and then the result you're beginning to see across this growth in the share of women founders. But we know there's something shifting in that enabling environment, and perhaps this ability for women to make use of some of those innovations and reclaim that space for themselves.
And Rebecca, I think one of the other things that we've all been talking about today is the importance of networks. And obviously LinkedIn is a network. But one of the things that you've spoken about is the network gap, and how things like where you went to school, or who you grew where you grew up, or what your own personal network is like, can be one of the key kind of hidden, subtle challenges that can hold anyone back, but also particularly women. So what more do you think can be done to help sort of address that in terms of helping women build networks, and what more do you think organizations can do to sort of support women in that?
Yeah, firstly, just to say, we talk about this gender network gap because it's really evident. And we saw in the US, for example, that women are 28% less likely to have a strong network compared to men. And that's replicated across every country that we look at. And we can imagine then the implication for that in terms of female founders, because the value of social capital is so huge. I mean, just to think of any example, whether you're a very small enterprise or whether you're at a sort of more advanced stage, if you don't have the ability to draw on a network to perhaps give you some of that early seed funding, or to just connect you to others who've got the skills that you might need as you're beginning your business, or indeed to just walk alongside you, it is much harder. So you've got a massive barrier there. I guess, from a LinkedIn point of view, part of the reason for our existence is to help create that more equitable ability to professionally network. So that in itself, we're trying to create a platform which women are very comfortable, confident being on, and able to sort of facilitate better and stronger networks. But there are much more active things to do as well. There are, of course, a lot of many organizations evolving who are dedicated to looking at how to improve that network gap for women. We try and give those organizations a voice on the platform as well. And I think we're very conscious of the fact, including in looking at some of the programmings that we do, that there's the financial capital gap, which we've talked about, there's a social capital gap, and there's a skills gap. And it's really clear from some of the evidence, the ILO have got some great research into this, that you need all of those elements to come together when you're trying to really help with that acceleration of success. So when we look at some of the programs that we specifically support, we try to look at, as many of you said, how do you bring the different elements together? How do you bring civil society, the industry capacity that we have, and the government aspects together? So just an example is, when we're thinking about filling maybe the digital skills gap, we're working with the UN Women in Maharashtra state, looking at women coming out of ITIs or the vocational educational institutes who want to start their own business, giving them entrepreneurial skills at that stage. So there's very specific targeted ways of thinking about interventions. And like all of you, I know when you're thinking about the design of that, and when governments are thinking about the design of their programs, how do you bring those elements together? And it often really does require that network of collaboration. I think there are other things, just on our platform itself, having access to digital programs, learning programs, which are specifically targeted at female founders. So Getting to Yes is similar to the programs that Meta have as well. Getting to Yes is it's a program entirely focused around how do how do you have some early learning for women who are thinking about what it means to be getting financial capital? And so making those sorts of things available, I think it's important for all of us in terms of the product offerings that we have to think about how do you facilitate that world of work for women.
Thank you. And so I think on that topic of networks, Naira, you've set up a network. You've recently set up WEMTech, the Mediterranean Women Tech Entrepreneurs. So I think from your experience, what role do you think peer-to-peer networks can have in helping bridge the gender gap, particularly in the startup ecosystem?
So first, I'm Secretary General of Women in AI, which is a global network of women in the AI industry. We are now more than 6,000 women all around the world. And I'm newly the president of WIMTech, which is literally Mediterranean Women Tech Entrepreneurs. And the idea of WIMTech started from this point of me going to conferences for speaking about women in AI and getting to the conclusion that I was the only Algerian woman at this kind of events. And first, I got this knowledge and network from being a part of Women in AI. But I was like, what if I will try to take this knowledge, this network, to my home country, to the women tech entrepreneurs in my home country. So the idea started from this, and from small conversation with Samir. And from that, I went back to Algeria and tried to contact some women tech entrepreneurs. So today, for the first time at Raisina Dialogue, we are the first Algerian tech delegation here. One of the women tech entrepreneurs is just here, Amira. So I join you to speak with her. She will share with you her business and all her struggles. So yeah, the initiative started from this network gap, and say, okay, I'm aware of that. I'm going back to my home country and try to create this network. The second point for me is that I strongly believe in the power of network. I did it with women in AI, now with WIMTech, because personally, I'm an optimistic person, okay? But there is a huge thing to do in changing the culture, the mindset, and we're doing it for decades and decades. So there's this thing of changing the mindset, but at the same time, we need to move forwards with this situation, with what is the reality today. And you can do it alone, or you can do it with others, because we are stronger all together. So that's the idea of a way, and that's the idea of WIMTech. So doing it all together to try to move forward. And especially, so WIMTech, the first chapter will be in Algeria. Because Algeria, just to let you know how the ecosystem is being in Algeria, because Algeria is not that present in all the other conferences all around the world, but Algeria is starting to do a huge work on the startup ecosystem. So they put in place many funds, and a new program to help students at the end of their studies to build their startup right away. So that's great, and that's a turning point for us, from a WIMTech point of view. But at the same time, Algeria is one of the countries when you have the strongest percentage of women engineers. So you have the skills, so you have the capacity, but something happened after that you can find only 20 or maybe between 20 and 30 women tech entrepreneurs. You have entrepreneurs, but women tech entrepreneurs. For me, that's the turning point. That's the point where we need to work to say, okay, they are doing a lot of things. They're starting to get aware of startup world, the ecosystem to be built on all the economic interest and the economic good for the government. And let's play at this level. Let's try to take this momentum. You see, so that's the thing that we will try to do in the coming months, and also just to, I was speaking about the fact of the point that in Algeria you have this high number of tech engineers. I also believe that this community and this network should also be have a local point of view. Because, for example, WAY, it's an international community. We have local chapters. But WIMTech will be around Mediterranean Sea, and especially Algeria and North Africa, because I do believe also that you have some cultural and historical specificity that you need to handle. For example, she will talk like, if you want, about her business, but she had to handle some technical and some business problematic that are really specific to Algeria, to the Algerian culture, for being in a Muslim Arabic country, and this is a reality. So being more impactful even in the network idea about focusing the effort on the local community and the local problematics. In Algeria, if we want to change the mindset, we're gonna talk to these women at the end of their studies and to say, okay, how can we encourage them to build their startup? So that's sorry.
No,
Maybe
sorry,
you
no.
wanna stop me.
So Nira, I think just picking up on what you were just talking about, just one other question I wanted to sort of probe you on a little bit is just looking a bit future forward. How do you think AI is going to transform the startup ecosystem? I think AI is something that we're all thinking about a lot right now. But particularly, why do you think it's important that we see more women in AI? Because that's a big thing that you're working towards.
AI is here. AI is here, and it's going to take more and more space. That's a reality. Okay. And at the same time, we are the one who are designing these AI algorithms are white men, and they're 35 years old from California. That's the thing. Okay. So they are training these algorithms with this data. That's a reality. So the thing is that they are reproducing the bias, the gender bias, the cultural bias at this level. So you are training simple algorithms with this bias. If we don't do something, we're going to reproduce the inequalities in this reality, and we're going to put them at the higher level, because it's gonna be in a sphere when we will not be able to have it's gonna be more difficult for us to identify the threats. So we need to I think we need to be. We are speaking about at all these conferences about AI, ethics, gender equality. That's the thing. But I think that we should put in place real discussion, and even at every private company to have this discussion about how the algorithms are trained, how the data are chosen, and having like an ethical group or someone being diverse. Sorry?
That's true for social media platforms.
Yeah, for social. Yeah, like for social media platform and this. But I think we need to start doing it, and not forcing. I don't like this word, but just very encouraging companies to put this, to create this ethical.
I was just going to add on this whole dialogue. It's about having a seat at the table, making sure that the laws and the regulations and the algorithms recognize that there are two genders in this world, and making sure that everything is done in as gender balanced as a way. Creating the capacity building so that the digital networks can be leveraged, the financial networks can be leveraged, and then the responsibility of all of us to have the programming and the capacity building built in that says we are going to lift up the other side of the world and provide opportunities for women, because it's good for business at the end of the day. And so it's seat at the table, non-discrimination written into the laws, the regulations, the processes, the algorithms, so that all these tools can be leveraged for the mutual benefit of men and women.
And I think that's why diversity is so important, to be able to achieve that. I think we are slightly over time. I think it's been a really, really engaging discussion, and I think we were all talking beforehand that we could have gone on for a couple of hours on this topic, but conscious everybody wants to have lunch as well. We probably have time for just 2 very quick questions, and then we can break for lunch. So one here and one at the very back, I think. And maybe we'll just take both questions together, and then the panelists can answer.
I'm Ruby Pavankar, the president of the Asia Pacific Allergy, Asthma, and Clinical Immunology, and the former president of the World Allergy Asthma, and a professor in Japan. And I'm talking in the space of healthcare and education, which is very important. And all this, what you have just discussed about the networking, the internet, the role of women, is so important when we go to healthcare and when we go to education. Who educates and who can provide the best information on health and education is a woman or a mother. And I think startups in that space are so important. And we in medicine have always been taught about how do you treat disease, how do you get new therapies to treat and new diagnostics. But why don't we think of wellness? And if we think of wellness, I think the role of a woman, how can we integrate, that's what I'm saying, how can we integrate all what you have said into the sector of healthcare and education to help people at the grassroots level? Because economy, a successful economy, comes with empowerment of women and good health.
Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Amira. I'm a founder of startup from Algeria. So I just liked the insights of today by pointing out that helping women is not only by doing the right thing, as Laura said. It goes beyond. So in terms of gaps, I will address today another gap that other than you mentioned, is to focus on the social entrepreneurship problems, that we can solve them and it will help our community. I will talk a little bit about our project. In our startup, we are helping women to work in vocational training, especially in construction trades work. So we are empowering women to work in male-dominated occupations. This will give them more opportunity to grow and also create a revenue for them that will support them in their lives. So my question is for you, Laura, and Mrs. Sandia. Thank you, sorry. So the question is, what are your focus on the North African area on terms of supporting projects, startups that are led by female founders, and what are the social problems that you already spot in the area that you address that we should focus on? Thank you.
The second part of the question was the social problems that we see. So, I mean, if, with respect to some of the programming that we're doing specifically to raise women's opportunities. So I love that you said that you're focusing on encouraging more women in the construction side. I mean, I'm now part of an amazing logistics company, and I didn't grow up, you know, thinking that I would be in this space. The first thing we're trying to do is create programming that says women have a role in logistics. We know how to you know, make these connections. We need to be part of the logistics industry because all trade depends on you know, logistics. And so we're trying to create programming that says, have you ever thought about being a part of the logistics industry? And doing dedicated outreach, coming out of universities saying, you have the technology background, you have the engineering background, have you ever thought about being a part of the logistics industry? And we're bringing that to all of our global operations. The second thing that we're doing is we're setting aside within our supplier and our procurement programs opportunities specifically to women-owned businesses so that we, as a huge multinational company, can be creating more diversity in our supply chains, particularly on the procurement side in terms of who we are engaging in our business so that it isn't going to the same companies, the same the same organizations that tend to be more male-dominated. We are specifically going out looking for women and diverse-owned suppliers to be part of our global operations. And in terms of the social challenges that we see that women often face, we try to be advocates for that. So we begin by providing great benefits for anyone that joins our organization and try to be trailblazers. We operate in 220 countries and territories. We provide some of the best health benefits, for example, some of the best maternal care benefits, some of the best daycare benefits, so that some of those social issues that sometimes keep people from being part of our organization, being able to provide for their families, we're providing industry-leading, gender-unbiased pay, and exceptional benefits targeted towards some of the women's issues that they face about being a part of the workforce. We try to be industry leading in that regard in every country in which we operate, so that we're setting a standard that then other companies have to follow. And I think about some of the companies that are on stage here. I know you're doing the same. And if we set that united example, I think we start changing the paradigm for who Meta, for example, engages from a supplier side, the same kind of benefits and opportunities for addressing some of the social challenges that keep women not as part of the workforce. And I know you all are doing some of the same.
Yeah, and I would just react to it and sort of, you talked about supplier diversity. We actually, during the pandemic, we realized that many minority-owned businesses weren't getting their fair share and their due in terms of access. And one of the things that we did launch that year, and which still on, is every year we committed to almost $1 billion of procurement of what we were doing would go to minority-owned businesses. So that would have impact not just in the US, globally as well, and that would cover Africa too. The second bit that I think we did was She Means Business, which I talked about, which is in 38 countries, that again, more access to skilling, because we think skilling is a gap, and we are at the forefront of a lot of the change that is happening, and that's where we're focused on. So those are some things that we've done. I'm sure there's more North Africa-led programs that we've done, but I wouldn't know the specifics of that here. The bit that I did want to react to was also healthcare, right? So during the pandemic is when we worked with MyGov in India to launch a vaccine bot, and that was, I think, used 80 million times, if I'm not mistaken. I think 30 million people downloaded their vaccination certificates off the platform. So I do think as technology, and it's not just about Meta, it's all the digital platforms that give access, how can we think about using that to make healthcare one, more accessible, easier to use, to educate, but also to do things like, give more awareness, give timely information, and also to sort of say set up appointments, fight disinformation, all of that. So there is definitely uses there that we could think of, and we've done that in multiple countries.
I know there were a couple more questions, but I think we'll have to leave them for the lunch discussion. But I'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists for a really great, engaging discussion today.